created to have some fun together, sharing and singing. So, join and enjoy.
Our love for opera brings us together. Thanks for being with us in this trip.
La 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 la. And I'm pretty sure that this opening really reminds you of someone who really achieved great success in the world of opera. Of course, I am speaking of Maestro Gioacchino Rossini. Of course, it is time now that we start talking about this genius, this musical genius that was born in the year 1792 in Pesaro, Italy. We all know that Italy has been one of the most important countries for the development of opera, and that is the case with Maestro Gioacchino Rossini. Also, before I forget, I would like to ask you to send us an email at operawillofsinging@gmail.com, operawillofsinging@gmail.com, and share with us your comments on what would you like to be the next series coming after this one, because at least this one compared to the previous to other two seasons, this is going to be much shorter. And so I would like to hear from you. What is it if you would like us to have the following season on some of the most remarkable singers of the past century? I think it would be worth it. But I would like to hear from you if you agree to that. Also, I would like to know if you feel like sharing with us what music and more in particular opera means to you, and anything that you would like to share. We are more than open and happy to read your emails. If you would like to get a response that is read in these podcasts, you need to tell it in the email. Please reply publicly, because going to get is going to be private. Okay? So, with all that being said, I'm going back to the creator of one of the most iconic roles in the world of opera, the role of Figaro. You can say at this time that there was already a Figaro in the composition of Maestro Mozart, and that is so true, but that is because both Mozart and Rossini based their operas on the same characters by Beaumarchais. But we will get there. So let's go back to the beginning after the la 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 la. And it is that, remember that in this series we are talking about what ChatGPT version 3.5 gives us as information to build our knowledge on a given composer. Of course, keeping in mind what I said on the first program, maybe by the time you listen to this program in a couple of years, you will say ChatGPT is part of the past, but this October 2023, that is, this program is being recorded, it is still, it lost somehow a little of the euphoria that was around it. Around half a year, there was lots of euphoria around it, but as things have settled down, people are less impressed than they were before. Still, there are news around the globe that students and even many professionals are having ChatGPT as their creator of content, if you allow me. I have read that even movie and librettos are being created by the ChatGPT per request of the user. I haven't read any of those, but we will keep our focus on what ChatGPT can tell us around a given composer. Today it is Maestro Rossini. And first question, as you know, the first question that I would like to ask ChatGPT is to describe Maestro Rossini in 500 words. What we saw in the program for Maestro Verdi, we noticed that ChatGPT was plagued with platitudes, and we noticed that it did much better in Puccini. Let's see how it did around Maestro Rossini. Okay, so we already talked about the year and the place where Maestro Rossini was born. Then there is an expression that says that Maestro Rossini was gifted with a melodic genius. He brought to the operatic world an unprecedented wit and elegance, blending memorable melodies with theatrical brilliance. I would like to make a small correction here. Because Maestro Rossini, I wouldn't agree for him to be elegant. Because as you will see with our coming the comments that I will be making after this one, Maestro Rossini was not supposed to be elegant. He was not a French composer such as Massenet maybe or Maestro Gounod. What he did is that he created brilliant sticky melodies, but Maestro Rossini's melodies are not known for being elegant. Even more, Maestro Rossini was sometimes criticized that they say that the music he created was too vulgar. So we adhere more to the version that yes, Maestro Rossini was gifted, but he was not an elegant composer. And so ChatGPT tells us a little about the early life of Maestro Rossini. So we are told that Maestro Rossini was born in a family of musicians. That is his mother Anna, who was a singer, and his father Giuseppe, who played the horn. And from my perspective, and I hope you agree, being born in a family of musicians is you already have the first the first of the things in your favor, because they will understand the interest you have for music. So he was exposed to music from an early age, and he learned the harpsichord and later the horn under his father's tutelage. By the age of 12, he was already composing. So the same way that we speak about Maestro Mozart, who started composing when he was still a child, in some countries, the age of 12 may not be a child, but he is not an adolescent either. And it is not a competition or on seeing who started composing, but it is just to admire the fact that even before being an adolescent, he was already composing. And he was lucky enough to enter Bologna's conservatory, where he studied cello and counterpoint. That is to say, that Rossini learned musical theory in a conservatory, because many people also say that it seems that Maestro Rossini's understanding of music theory is poor. And I would say that it is not that Maestro Rossini's understanding of music was poor. It is that he created his style, of which we are going to be talking much longer. So, and the next session by ChatGPT, and so, that next section tells us about the operatic achievements by Maestro Rossini, and ChatGPT says that Rossini's reputation as a composer was sealed by the time he was 20 with his opera Tancredi. From that point onward, he composed numerous operas that became popular not just in Italy but across Europe. One of his most acclaimed works, The Barbiere of Sevilla, Il Barbiero di Siviglia, 1816, faced initial hostility but eventually became a staple of the opera repertory. Its lively overture, intricate ensembles, and character-driven arias exhibit Rossini's mastery over the operatic form. But Rossini was not confined to comedic opera. His Otello, 1816, reshaped Shakespeare's tragedy with an Italian touch, while Semiramide, 1823, showcased his capabilities in the serious opera realm. If you ask me, this section about the operatic achievements is, except for the mention of Il Barbiere di Siviglia, I think it's poorly put together, because it is speaking only of a couple of operas without really providing any rationale on why they are operatic achievements. I think that in place of mentioning maybe Semiramide, we should talk about Guglielmo Tell, but we will talk about it a little later. Now, moving on to the next section here in this response by ChatGPT, it talks about Paris and his later works. And it says that in the 20s, 1820, Rossini moved to Paris, adapting to French operatic tastes. His grand opera, William Tell, in English, of course, Guillaume Tell in French, Guglielmo Tell in Italian, stands as his crowning achievement from this period. However, this was to be his final opera, since, surprisingly, at the age of 37, Rossini stopped composing operas entirely, even though he lived for almost 40 more years. And that is so true because it is not the case as in the unfortunate situation of Maestro Bizet, who died at an early age. Maestro Rossini lived even 40 more years than the one he had by the time he stopped. But he decided to stop. Strange case, but this is what he decided to do. Retirement and legacy. There is an interesting mention by ChatGPT, which is true, of course, that even though Rossini stopped composing operas, he did not abandon music. That is so very true. He created the delightful Péché de Vieillesse, which is a nice, funny title, and it is a collection of vocal, chamber, and piano works. Also, Rossini's later life was marked by bouts of illness and depression, but he remained a prominent figure in the Parisian society, known for his wit, culinary passion, and generous patronage of younger artists. And a third of the responses of ChatGPT is nothing but platitudes. It wraps up very poorly. It only adds something about Maestro Rossini having stopped composing by the age of 37, living for 40 more years. He stopped writing operas, but he wrote a couple of more things, one of them being those Péché de Vieillesse, a great title for the character of Maestro Rossini, and a little more that we are about to mention a little more ahead. So if I would have to score from 0 to 10 the quality of these 500 words to describe Rossini per ChatGPT, I would give it a 6. I think there should be more important information about the role of Maestro Rossini in the world of opera. And you know that after that section, since I am starting to not being satisfied on the responses by ChatGPT, I keep asking questions so that we can have something much better. And my next question is to list the Rossini's operas in chronological order. I am pretty sure that many of the ones that I am about to mention, you don't even know them because they are hardly ever represented on a stage. So we start with La Cambiale di Matrimonio, 1810, L'Equivoco Stravagante, 1811, Demetrio e Polibio, 1812, L'Inganno Felice, 1812, Ciro in Babilonia, 1812, La Scala di Zeta, 1812, La Pietra del Paragone, 1812, La Occasione fa il ladro. If you notice, I have just mentioned 6 operas composed in the same year, 1812. What a prolific year, but remember that even though he was composing too many operas, he was not a success yet. We will talk a little more about this prolific composer and the success coming a little later. 1813, Il Signor Bruschino. Tancredi, 1813. Many people keep in mind Tancredi because Tancredi, it is an opera seria, by the way, as opposed to the opera buffa. Tancredi has a very interesting role and more interesting aria that is known as the Tanti Palpiti. I would like to advance or make comments in advance before we jump to the other sections, because Maestro Rossini had a very clear preference towards the voice of mezzo-sopranos. We will mention more a little about that. And we haven't spoken about the ornaments. The compositions by Maestro Rossini are always full of ornaments, and this is what we are going to witness. And one of the most well-known arias in this opera that is known as the Tanti Palpiti. For many people, I would like also to mention that it is not even written for mezzos, or at least not in the conception that we have of mezzos nowadays, but more of what we understand currently as contraltos. Because if you notice the way the music and the notes are written by Rossini, you will notice that they are a little too low even for the mezzos of nowadays. So just to share with you a little of the melody of the Tanti Palpiti. Di tanti palpiti, di tanti palpiti, di tanti palpiti, mi vuoi palpiti, vuoi dar. And it is very interesting because before I forget, remember that whenever there are ornaments, it means that there is always a singer that is willing to do the changes, to add things, to do something that is not really written. There is also an anecdote in the master classes by Maria Callas in the singing of Rosina. By the way, when the soprano, the young soprano, adds more to what is written. And so Maria Callas makes the reference that one has to adhere to the style of the composer, and that even though Rossini wrote many ornaments, he didn't expect the singers to deform, to change what he had written. He expected them to adhere, because also we need to mention that many times it is not that the singer does not want to adhere, but that he finds himself unable to sing what is written, and so he finds as an easy way out to sing something differently, to sound like variations, while in fact what happens is that he is unable to sing. So we're going back to the Tanti Palpiti. The words of the main melody go like, let me find it real quick. Di tanti palpiti, di tante pene, dolce mio bene, spero mercé, mi rivedrai, ti rivedrò. Di tanti palpiti, mi rivedrai, ti rivedrò. And if you would like to listen to a good version of this aria, I think that you can look for Marilyn Horns. Marilyn Horns, from my perspective, does a very nice job with this aria. Keep in mind that this is a very low written. It is written for very low notes, for nice chest notes. And I think that Marilyn Horn, besides the ornaments, besides the fiorituri, she also does a very nice job in understanding the bel canto of Rossini, because I think that also ChatGPT should have mentioned that Maestro Rossini is in fact one of the composers of that period of opera that is called the bel canto. Let's continue with naming the order of the creations of Maestro Rossini, and we then fall for maybe the third most known opera by Maestro Rossini, and of course I am referring to L'Italiana in Algeri. And the Italian Girls in Algiers is one of the operas that Rossini wrote putting an European in foreign lands. So he's putting an European girl in the lands of Algiers, in Africa, of course, and then he will do it the opposite by taking the Turkish and taking him to Italy. So it is somehow like complementary. We send L'Italiana to Algeria, and then we send back a Turkish to Italy. That's the kind of games that Maestro Rossini liked to have, and this is what he did with those two operas. But going back to L'Italiana in Algeri, L'Italiana in Algeri is such a very well-written opera for a mezzo that she has 3 times to show her abilities. Also, it is written, as in the case of Tancredi, in a very low key. So mezzos that do not have a powerful bottom lines have trouble with dealing with this opera. One of the passages Isabella is the name of the female character in L'Italiano in Algeri, is the passage known as Per lui che adoro. Si, 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 un colpetto e di scarso turco, turco caro, 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 un colpetto de cascar. Un colpetto, de cascar, sì, cascar. Per lui che adoro. And then also comes a much better known aria known under the name of Cruda sorte. Cruda sorte, amor tirano, questo il premio de mia fe. Non v'è orror, terror né affano, pari a quel ch'io provo in me. Per te solo, mio Lindoro, Lindoro is the name of the man she loves, io mi trovo in tal periglio di che spero, o che consiglio, o Dio consiglio, chi conforto mi darà, da chi spero, o Dio consiglio, chi conforto mi darà, da chi spero, Dio consiglio, chi conforto mi darà, chi mi darà felicità. Yesso per pratica qual sia l'effetto d'un sguardo languido, d'un sospiretto, su amarli e uomini come si fa? Sì, 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 su adomarli uomini come si fa? Tarantantan. There is also another part in the same opera, usually known as Amici in ogni evento, also sung by Isabella de Mezzo. But I also wanted to mention before we stop talking about l'Italiana that the tenor in l'Italiana in Algeri is very interesting because Lindoro happens to need to sing from the very beginning of the opera a very well-known aria under the name of Languir per una bella. This Languir per una bella is a perfect example of what Maestro Rossini expects from a tenor. A light, high, very high voice, being able to reach much higher than the high C. That very famous high C of the tenor is surpassed in this aria, Languir per una bella, because Maestro Rossini, why not, would like to ask the tenor to sing a little higher than that. And that is usually the reason this aria is cut or is changed in the tone, because it is not that easy to find that tenor that is willing to sing that Languir per una bella estar lontano, And the thing that I will mention it a little more a little later is that personally I don't like the sound of the Rossinian tenors. For me, their voices are way too light, but let's keep it there and keep moving for the following repertory before we jump into any more details on the voice of the Rossinian tenors. As we are moving ahead, moving forward with the creations, with the compositions by Maestro Rossini, we now need to talk about Aureliano in Palmira, 1813, Il Turco in Italia, 1814, the one that I told you about, how Rossini played with sending an European to another continent, Italiano in Algeri, and then sending one from another continent to Italia, to Europe. That is the case for Il Turco in Italia. We have Sigismondo, 1814, Elisabetta, Regina d'Inghilterra, 1815. By the way, Elisabetta, Regina d'Inghilterra, even though it is not that often represented, we can recall that there's been a few singers of the past 50 years, 70 maybe, including, of course, there are a couple of recordings of the arias by Montserrat Caballé. Of course, you know that Montserrat Caballé has had, besides having a very beautiful voice, had a very good technique for the Rossini coloratura. So you can find a couple of recordings by Montserrat Caballé Of course, you can also recall Beverly Seals. Beverly Seals also recorded that, and then again, Edita Gruberova also did recordings on the same role. Very interesting to watch because this is a very difficult opera to sing. If you have the chance, go and look for Elisabetta, Regina d'Inghilterra. Then in the year 1815, Torvaldo ed Orlisca, and then we reach the first great success by Maestro Rossini. Il Barbiere di Siviglia, of which we have already talked about a little earlier, so we will not stop there. We move ahead. We have in 1816 La Gazzetta, then we have Otello, 1816. Of course, this is a serious version of Otello, and of course, Verdi's version of Otello is much more famous than the one by Maestro Rossini. And then year 1817, we reach La Cenerentola, my favorite opera by Maestro Rossini, Cinderella, based on the same character. And before I forget, I would like to mention something that it is very important. We will talk about a little more ahead, but this is an omission by ChatGPT, and this is the reason why I want to include it before I forget it. And this is that Maestro Rossini did not believe in supernatural powers or magic or anything like that. That is the reason why when writing La Cenerentola based on Cinderella, that is the reason why there is not a fairy godmother to support La Cenerentola. There is a philosopher, because he wanted to humanize and make and tell the story the way he liked the story. And Rossini didn't like any supernatural beings or powers. He didn't believe in that, and that's why he turned the fairy godmother into a philosopher. Next year, La Gazza Ladra, 1817. Then we have Armida, 1817. From my perspective, Armida has, if not the hardest, one of the hardest arias ever written for a soprano. If you have had a chance, or you can go looking for that, I think it is already uploaded to YouTube, but you can look for the recording of Maria Callas on the opera Armida. I think there's been no more than maybe 2 or 3 singers in the past 50 or 70 years that have sung it. And if you want to know who has sung it well, it would only be Maria Callas. And there is also a recording of the main aria by Montserrat Caballé, which she also does very splendid. That aria that I've been talking about, it's named D'amore al dolce impero. That aria, D'amore al dolce impero, in the opera Armida, it's, believe me, one of the hardest. It has so many ornaments, so many notes written in so little time that one can easily picture the singer hardly ever having the time to breathe. Of course, if you want to put it into words, it is, of course, much harder. Also, oops, something fell to the floor. Also, try to picture not only with words, but try to picture with ascending and descending scales. So what starts very quiet, like D'amore al dolce impero, natura ognuno soggiace, dove quell'alma audace che non avreti amor, chi dirà dare la dando tarando tarando beautifully, and Montserrat Caballé makes a graceful pause after all these agilities and coloraturas. Taran, 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 tan, taran, 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 taran. I really encourage you to go and look for the version of the Mora Dolce, the Moral Dolce Impero, either by Montserrat Caballé studio recording or Maria Callas live recording. And if also you have the chance of listening to the complete recording of Armida by Maria Callas, you really say, I have heard it and rehearsed it a couple of times. And I think that even Beverly Seals sang it. I'm not pretty sure at this moment, but Maria Callas for sure. And I remember that the couple of times that I have heard it entirely, I have told myself, oh my God, Rossini wrote a role that is virtually impossible to sing. Of course, we are speaking of a young Maria Callas in the plenitude of her voice, attacking in full voice, and also recall that Armida is a heavy role. The way it wraps up, and she's a witch, and so the final scene with that music somehow heavy, somehow dark, tan tarararan tarararan tan tarararan by Maestro Rossini gives it a very interesting color. So let me insist that if you have the chance, go and look for the recording of Maria Callas of Armida, or at least the recording of the aria D'amore al dolce impero by Montserrat Caballé. We have barely passed half of the way of the compositions by Gioacchino Rossini, and now we need to mention Adelaide di Borgogna, Mose in Egitto in 1818, Adina, composed in 1818 but premiered in 1826, Ricciardo e Zoraide, Hermione, 18. And something happens that this recording keeps pausing. Hopefully the final result will not be that bad. But if you notice, then we have, let me repeat the recordings. Adina, 1818, Ricciardo e Zoraide, 1818, Hermione, 1818, Eduardo e Cristina, 1819, La Donna del Lago, 1819, Bianca e Faliero, 1819, Maometto II, 1820, Matilde di Chabran, 1821, Telmira, 1822, Semiramide. Semiramide also needs that we make some comments on that. Semiramide is also a very famous composition by Maestro Rossini, and of the main arias there is recordings by also again Montserrat Caballé, John Sutherland, Maria Callas mainly. If you want the complete version of this opera, you can also look for Montserrat Caballé and Marilyn Horne, or John Sutherland and Marilyn Horne. The two of them sang with Marilyn Horne, which I think does a very good job also in Semiramide. The most well-known opera in Semiramide is Bel raggio signier di speme e di piacer al fin per me brillo Arsacci ritornò sì a me verrà quest'alma che finor geme tremo languì o come respiro ogni del mio sparì dal cor dal mio pensier dilegui il terror si bel raggio lusinghier. If you have the opportunity of listening to this aria, somehow for some reason it reminds me of El rapto en el Saraglio, that I always keep forgetting of the name in German, by Mozart. But there is this Bel raggio Luisinger, to me is very similar to that composition of Mozart. Wonder if coincidence or not at all, Also, in that same opera, you have a duet uh, under the name of starts by saying Servami ognor, Servami ognor, si fido, il cor gli affetti il tuoi, e tutto sperar puoi. Tan 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 tararin tarak taridaren tan tan taran tan tarararan tarak taridaren do del mio dolci palpiti del viro di mio cuore del mio dolci premi a premar te taniran tin tin tan tiri tin tin tan 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 tiran tin tan. And there is the two voices mixing together, the mezzo and the soprano, playing together with those ascending and descending scales and fiorituri. And also, since I had noticed that ChatGPT had forgotten in its 500 words, it had clearly omitted the fact to mention about the composition style by Maestro Rossini. I asked that, and let me share with you what ChatGPT replied. That Rossini's compositional style is distinguished by its brilliance, wit, and melodic inventiveness. His music is often imbued with a sense of humor, and his unique approach to operatic composition set him apart from his contemporaries. Here are some characteristics that are key to elements of Rossini's style. Number one, melodic genius. Rossini's melodies are undeniably catchy, full of grace and beauty. More than beauty, I would keep grace and catchy. Whether in arias, duets, or ensembles, his gift for creating memorable tunes is evident. Of course, the tra la 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 la, the other melody, such as La Calumnia, tan tararararan, tarararan, tan 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 tararan. The melody also by Rossini in Una voce poco fa, tu to to ta 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 ta. Ti-di-di-do, ta-ra-ra, ta-ra-ra-ra, ta-ra-ra-ra, ta-ra-ran, ta-ra-ran. And there are other melodies. If you go for L'Italiana in Algeri, the sexteto in L'Italiana in Algeri, just perfection. The melodies of in La Cenerentola by the stepfather of La Cenerentola are just great as well. And the number two mentioned by ChatGPT, the crescendo, the very well known, I would add, very well known Rossini crescendo is a hallmark of his style. It is a technique where he gradually builds up musical tension over a repetitive rhythmic pattern, increasing the volume and often the orchestration, leading to a climatic resolution. This is the way Maestro Rossini liked to wrap up, moreover, the first acts of his operas. The perfect example, go for Il Barbiere di Siviglia, and if you recall that scene where everybody is laughing at Don Bartolo, tarariran, 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 tarariran. Also, you can recall the melody for wrapping up the first act of La Cenerentola, where they are having that supper. Tan taran tan 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 taran tarararan tan 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 taran tarararan tan 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 taran tarararan tan. And also you have a similar assembly of voices and orchestra in L'Italiana in Algeri, where you also have the very interesting way he creates the boom 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 tin 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 boom 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 tin 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 tac 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 tin 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 tac, 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 tin, 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 bo 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 bom, tiki 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 tin, bo 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 bom, tiki 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 tin, tac, 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 bom, 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 bom. And that way he liked to create, to play with the sounds, make around Rossini such it is such a pleasure to watch and enjoy at the opera theaters, or if you're at home and you want to turn on the volume. I know that more than once you have enjoyed those Rossini crescendos. We also have the overtures, of course. If something can be said to be a specialty of Maestro Rossini, are the overtures. Of course, you know the overture of the Il Barbiere di Siviglia. Of course, you know the overture of Guglielmo Tell. It was the one for La Gazzaladra, and I also would dare to say that the one for La Cenerentola. And why? Because they are also so catchy, so bright. In the case in particular for Guillaume Tell, you have that one of its passages has been taken for many, I would say, for Hollywood or American products such as Disney, and they use it for characters. In Spanish, it is called El Llanero Solitario, for that hero of the West, Old West in the US, dun, 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 because they take the melody of this overture of Guillermo Tell. So in Mexico, many people know it as the melody of El Llanero Solitario. Very bright music that we would like to recall. And another point made here by ChatGPT, go for the orchestration, point number 4, the orchestration, and he says his use of the orchestra was innovative. He had a penchant for transparent textures and used wind instruments for color and characterization. His orchestrations, while not overly complex, were effective in supporting and enhancing vocal lines. Yes, it is. The orchestration by Maestro Rossini is always bright and always adheres to what the singer is actually singing. Next bullet number 5, use of coloratura. Rossini frequently employed coloratura, which are elaborate ornamentation for vocal lines, for his soprano and mezzo-soprano roles. I would add also for the tenors, and even for the baritones and basses, demanding great virtuosity from his singers. This can be heard in roles such as in Rosina or the title role in Semiramide. If you ask me, this number 5 by ChatGPT is a little poor because it is narrowing it to the mezzo-soprano and soprano roles, and it is also narrowing it to only a couple of operas, while Maestro Rossini did, if I am not mistaken, exception Guglielmo Tell, that would be the only exception. All the other operas have ornaments and coloratura. Number 6, harmonic language. While Rossini's harmonies are largely rooted in the classical tradition, he often uses them with a sense of playfulness and surprise, keeping the listener engaged. I would agree. Operatic structure. Rossini was a master of the opera buffa or comic opera tradition, but he also composed serious operas, the opera seria. His operas usually include a series of set pieces, cavatinas, the caballetas, lively concluding section of arias, duets, and ensembles. He was known for reusing some of his own material when under time constraints, and a practice not uncommon in that area. Yeah, Maestro Rossini was known also by plagiarism. The plagiarism was for his own operas. He would take a number already composed for one of his operas, make a couple of changes, and then reuse it. Yes, that was Maestro Rossini. Finally, number 8, dramatic insight. Sorry, not finally, still we have 9 and 10, but number 8, dramatic insight. While his operas, especially the comic ones, are lighthearted, Rossini had an astute sense of drama. His music adeptly underscores the emotional state of the characters and advances the plot. Personally, I wouldn't say I agree. I wouldn't say I disagree, but I don't think that Rossini was particularly good in building drama. If you disagree, please send me an email at operawillofsinging@gmail.com, operawillofsinging@gmail.com. Personally, I do not think that Maestro Rossini was that successful in building drama. Economy and efficiency, number 9. Rossini had a knack for achieving maximum musical effect with seemingly effortless means. His textures, while transparent, are filled with character and wit. Okay, yeah, I would agree that Rossini is efficient in conveying the character or the characters, the voice and music that accompanies it. Number 10, later works on French opera. I am not going to read it. I don't think later works on French opera are really a characteristic of Rossini, so we will skip this number by ChatGPT. And since I know that also in its initial presentation of Rossini by ChatGPT had forgotten or had omitted some anecdotes around Rossini, I asked ChatGPT to provide a couple of them because it is always interesting to meet the man behind the genius. So, Rossini, couple of anecdotes from his life. The lazy genius. Rossini was often teased for his perceived laziness, given his tendency to compose quickly and then enjoy long periods of leisure. When asked why he didn't write more after the age of 37, Rossini cheekily replied, "Because if Beethoven took so long to write his symphonies, how could I be any faster?" There is something particular about the relationship on time and composition around Rossini and Beethoven, but let's leave it there for now. Number 2, creation of the Barbiere di Siviglia. Legend has it that Rossini composed Il Barbiere in just 12 days. While this might be an exaggeration, it wasn't much longer. The speed with which Rossini often composed was legendary. Well, writing a masterpiece like Il Barbiere di Siviglia, if not 12 days, even if it was 2 months, I would say 2 months very well spent. More than 200 years after the composition of Il Barbiere di Siviglia, it remains as one of the most represented operas. So, what else can one ask from a genius like Rossini? Number 3, a fallen manuscript. One story goes that Rossini, while writing a piece in bed, dropped part of the manuscript to the floor. Rather than pick it up, he simply started writing a new one. When he was asked why, he was supposed to have replied that it was easier to write a new one than get out of the bed. Rossini's punctuality. Once, when a singer complained about the difficulty of an aria Rossini had written, the composer retorted, "When I wanted the aria, I had to write it myself." On Wagner, what did he say about Wagner? The German composer, of course, Wagner. Richard Wagner. Rossini is often quoted for his playful dig at the German composer Richard Wagner. He said once, "Wagner has lovely moments but awful quarters of an hour." That says much of how Rossini pictured Wagner and much of the jokes that he liked to make. Also, Rossini had a passion for food. Rossini was a renowned gourmet and loved to cook. He once declared, "I know of no more admirable occupation than eating, that is, eating in the gourmet sense." Many dishes have been named in his honor, such as the Tornidus Rossini, a luxurious steak dish with foie gras. The Thunder of Rossini. You go for La Gazza Ladra or you go for La Cenerentola second act, where Rossini had a certain fear of real thunder but was fond of creating thunderous sounds in the theater. He incorporated realistic sounding thunder into the music. Go and check the second act when Il Principe Ramiro goes looking for Cenerentola after the party in the castle, and there is this very, very famous scene of thunder. That's what this refers to. Rossini loved the thunder scene in his composition. An anecdote around the premiere of the Barbiere di Siviglia: it was notoriously disastrous, with on-stage accidents, vocal mishaps, and even a cat wandering onto the stage. Despite this initial failure, the opera would go on to become one of Rossini's most celebrated works, I could say that this premiere of Barbiere di Sibiglia is not really worth as an anecdote. Many great composers have not been famous on their first representation or representations of his operas, so I would leave this one out. Rossini and Beethoven, I told you that we would go back to Beethoven, and this number 9 says Rossini met Ludwig van Beethoven once in 1822. The German composer, not great fan of Italian opera, I'm sure you know why, still advised Rossini to stick to his comic operas, saying, "Never try to write anything else but opera buffa. Any other style would do violence to your nature." Well, I think that Beethoven was wrong because we have Semiramide, we have Tancredi, and we have Guillaume Tell on the opera seria, which happen to be very great compositions by Rossini. True or not true, this is what ChatGPT offers to us in memory of Gioacchino Rossini. But we still have time for two more. Dio, we still have 3 questions that I ask. I'm going to go much faster. It is known that Rossini had a preference for mezzos and contraltos. In his times, there was already a decline in the castrati voci. That is why Rossini liked more those Rossinian mezzos I was sharing with you a little earlier have deeper voices than the mezzos now. The mezzos then sounded more like contraltos. Those contraltos that could sing l'Italiana in Algeri or Rosina with very strong chest notes. And there is another reason for that. The other reason for that is that Rossini fell in love and even married to a very famous soprano under the name of Isabella Colbran. Isabella Colbran. Since I noticed that ChatGPT had omitted this fact, I asked ChatGPT to elaborate on Isabella Colbran. And La Colbran was born in 1785. He married to Rossini in 1822, and it is known that Rossini wrote several roles for the particularities of the voice of La Colbran. So, part of the explanation of why Rossini wanted to write so many beautiful pieces for the mezzo voice is because his lover and later spouse, La Colbran, had a voice able to sing those. Of course, nobody wants to have a problem with his wife. That's why he kept composing for him. It is not mentioned, and that's why I also asked ChatGPT to elaborate a little further on the most difficult arias to sing by Gioacchino Rossini, and it provides a list that I am not very satisfied with. It says that Una voce poco fa. I would tell you Una voce poco fa is not a difficult aria to sing. But I don't know where ChatGPT got this information from, but it is not true. Una voce poco fa is not a difficult aria. The one I told you from Armida, that one, L'amore al dolce impero, is really hard. And it is mentioned by the number 6. Nacqui alla fano non più mesta from La Cenerentola, the final aria, yeah, that one is much harder. Even some mezzos have problems in wrapping up the opera in Nacqui alla fano. Di tanti palpiti, it says that it is hard. I wouldn't agree with ChatGPT. Languir per una vela, yes, the one I told you about. Languir per una vela. Da-da-da. Very demanding aria for the tenor. Yes, I agree. I think it is not included here. It's included a little ahead. We also have Bel Rayo Luisinger that I mentioned to you earlier in Semiramide. Yes, very, very difficult coloratura. D'amore al dolce impero, which I mentioned earlier. Yes, D'amore al dolce impero, very difficult to sing. Cessa di più resistere from Il Barbiere di Sibiglia. Yes, the rapping aria and even scene by the prince in Il Barbiere di Sibiglia. Very, very difficult to sing. No, not prince, sorry, Il Conte is the one who sings it. Very, very difficult aria, similar to Languir. Languir per una vela, cessa di più resistere, di più resistere. And then it offers also Si ritrovarla io giuro, yes, the aria from Don Ramiro, the prince, now I am correct, the prince in La Cenerentola, also a challenging aria because it is filled, I think it demands 6 high Cs from the tenor. And that is pretty much what ChatGPT has provided to us. But I would like to make a couple of additional notes. We went for a chronological order of his opera compositions, but it doesn't mean that he didn't write anything else. There is another piece that is called La Canzonetta Spagnola, which you may also be familiar with. And tan taran tan taran 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 ta 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 tara 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 ta 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 tara tara. There is also the tarantella. You may recall also that there is a tarantella written by Rossini. But I wanted to also mention as a final piece to wrap up around Maestro Rossini that he wrote, and you may have already noticed, even if I have not remarked it enough, that Maestro Rossini had a very bright sense of humor. He was very sarcastic, he loved irony, and he wrote his last composition, his Requiem, which he called La Petite Messe Solennelle, which refers like a small or short duration mess, which in fact is very long. In fact, he used the name Petite Messe Solennelle because he knew it wasn't short. Just to laugh at himself, he put the name of what described the opposite of what he had already composed. That is La Petite Messe Solennelle, but out of La Petite Messe Solennelle, he also wrote 2 arias that are very difficult to sing. One is for the tenor, very well known in Gemisco. In Gemisco, very difficult to sing. Ta-da-da, 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 ta-da-da. And of course, we have the other difficult aria, but now it's for the soprano. Sopranos hardly ever sing it. If you want to listen to a very beautiful rendition of this aria, go and look for Montserrat Caballé. Montserrat Caballé does a great job in singing the soprano piece for La Petite Messe Solennelle. Enough for today. Thank you very much for sharing all these minutes with me talking about the master of the opera buffa, Maestro Gioacchino Rossini.